Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us today. My name is Chris Anderson, and I lead the identity evangelism at Duo Security, now part of Cisco. In my role, I spend my time talking with security leaders around the world about the identity challenges that keep them up at night. And more importantly, what's actually working to solve them. Today, we're going to have an honest practitioner-level conversation about the state of identity. We'll cover everything from budget realities and lifecycle management headaches to the rise of Agentic AI and what it means for how we govern access. And so today, I'm thrilled to be joined by Frank, Locke, and David. Guys, why don't you actually introduce yourself? And let's start with Frank.
Okay, well, thank you. I'm Frank Aiello. I'm the Chief Information Security Officer for a company called Maximus. I've been there the past 7.5 years. We're a government contractor based in Northern Virginia. And basically our job is we administer health and human services programs, as well as performing technology consulting for the federal, state, and local governments.
Locke, let's go second.
My name is Locke Langdon. I'm the VP of IT Operations and CISO at Aprio. We're the 20th largest tax advisory and accounting firm in the United States. We have approximately 3,500 employees serving clients across more than 50 countries. We focus on industries like technology, government contracting, healthcare, and private corporate tax. Our biggest driver today is mergers and acquisitions. The financial services organizations are going through a transformation, and a lot of my time is focused on new accounts, new identities, new users, all coming in from these mergers and acquisitions. Last year alone, we acquired over 14 companies.
And with that, David, see if you can beat that.
Hello, my name's David Cass. I'm the CISO for KeyRock. KeyRock is a crypto financial services company. I'm responsible for security, privacy, and enterprise technology, as well as I've been a federal regulator in the past where I was in charge of cyber and IT risk for the 8 largest banks in the world. Happy to be joining you guys today.
Thank you to the three of you. David, since you went last, you've got to answer the first question. When speaking with organizations around the world, I typically hear that identity security is near the top, typically around top 3 in terms of priority. But, priority and funded priority are two very different things. I'm curious, from your experience, both in your current role, maybe even the previous roles, have you seen the conversation around identity budgets actually change in the last 12 to 18 months?
So hopefully they've been increasing. I think identity is one of those things, for better or worse. It's, what's old is new again. And it's one of those things that organizations continue to struggle with. And now I'd say, being in crypto, identity is extremely important to me because identity and keys and things like that have direct financial consequences on my organization, as well as, the rise of Agentic AI. And I think it's just one of those problems that organizations have struggled with. And, if you don't keep up with it and adopt the newer and newer technology, it gets to be very difficult. And you're often essentially positioning yourself for bad things to happen because we consider identity, at least as a former regulator, identity is considered basic blocking and tackling. So if you have issues in that space, as a former regulator, we tend to frown upon that.
David, let's put that regulator hat back on for just a minute. A number of conversations I've had with individuals around the world have said something along the lines of, without customer trust, without good cybersecurity, we don't have a great business. And so I'm curious, when did identity stop being a IT plumbing problem and start becoming a board level conversation? And maybe it's not identity that's become the board level conversation, but maybe it's security and identity is wrapped within that.
Based on my current role at KeyRock, identity is central to everything that we do. So it really has to be woven through the fabric of the organization. So it's moved from just being a security hot button item to really having to be woven through the whole fabric of enterprise IT, where we look at how does identity essentially merge with anything new that we're bringing on, as well as how do we extend, SSO, MFA, and everything into any new products that we're bringing on as well. And then, as a former regulator, identity and access management is, one of the basics of security hygiene. So from a security hygiene perspective, we really look at it as, if you're not doing your basic blocking and tackling as a former regulator, that would give us a lot of consternation. And you don't want to do that to your regulator because that brings other questions and that tends to bring findings and things that other organizations would not appreciate hearing from us.
Hey, Frank, I'm curious from your point of view, are you seeing similar items? Are you seeing more of the security level conversations at the board? Or what are you seeing from your point of view?
So I think with our organization, I've not really had any significant issues getting funding and approved for identity management. Where we're actually seeing our investment over the past 12 to 18 months is due to complexity and the growing number of environments we have to have that must remain segregated. But how do we try to manage those consistently? As a federal contractor, we manage two FedRAMP offerings that are on the marketplace. Just this past year, we were approved for our CMMC certification for Department of War work. So it's actually our growth in privileged access management, in identity governance is continuing to expand. Likewise, our global markets have operated pretty independently, and one of their major projects we have going on right now is their human resources solution. And we're starting to deploy that as a standard global solution, and we're actually tying our identity management project to that.
And actually, if I could add to Frank's point, as a financial services organization, even though we're in crypto, we recently bought an asset wealth management company as well. So keeping that walled garden approach is very important in how we maintain the integrity between, we're one large financial services organization, yet I may have traders as well as the asset wealth management groups that can't talk to each other, by design from a regulatory perspective. So that adds complexity into your IAM program as well.
Yeah, no, that makes perfect sense. And actually segues a little bit into, I'm pretty sure Locke said that you acquired something like 14 companies within the last year. So I'm curious, for you, Locke, has M&A activity, I've seen that it's been one of the biggest drivers for identity sprawl, but it also unlocks some additional budget and some executive attention at times.
Our core intellectual property is our data, right? Our clients' information. If we don't manage and maintain that appropriately, we're not a company. So being able to identify who has access, who has control, who can manage and share and collaborate on all of these capabilities, with the backstop of the regulatory scopes that we've got with like IRS 7216 and some of the SEC changes recently, you have to know the identity and control those appropriately. So with our mergers and acquisitions, a lot of time you're acquiring smaller entities that may not have great hygiene. So we have to adopt a pretty kind of direct approach, which is, hey, you're fired on Friday and you're hired on Monday, right? So we have a clean cut, we have new identities, new devices, but as we keep growing, that's not sustainable. And as larger entities become a part of our Aprio fabric, like there's new capabilities and new criteria that we have to align to. We've got mainframes now, right? So understanding the requirements around identity and access for those. And then realistically, SaaS is just the explosion of everything from an identity perspective. So, you have to maintain those, you have to manage access. Not everything supports the nice flavors of SCIM or even OpenID, right? Like at its core. So managing those and the sprawl associated with that is really a challenge that we're working through.
SCIM's a fun one there, Locke, especially so many SaaS apps kind of deployed it slightly different and not always consistent.
Yeah. And you have to pay the SSO tax too, right? A lot of companies gate that behind some fancy enterprise license security, and it really causes some increased costs, but you have to understand that up front and be prepared for it. Otherwise, it's definitely a hit to your overall budget. But I mean, investment in identity for us is a no-brainer just because of the nature of the identity is how people get access to our data, and that's our lifeblood.
It's almost like somebody in the past created the SSO.tax website. So yes, totally understand what you're saying. I'm curious though, Locke, in some of those M&A activities, have you ever used it as, we'll call it like a strategic, business event where you use that as a way to increase funding for maybe a cloud migration or a compliance mandate that now you need to meet that previously you didn't? Did you ever use that type of event to try to get additional funding to any of these transitions?
Yeah, I mean, luckily we've done it enough now that we have a pretty solid kind of acquisition plan. We've got like a per user basic cost that's associated with the transition. So I think just because of the nature of our maturity, we don't have that inflexibility, right? The reality is this is an acquisition. We're going to have to acquire them safely and securely. So we've got a pretty good plan around that. When we first started, absolutely, it was a focus on, okay, let's, you know, post letter of intent, right? The LOI, that's when IT was usually brought in. So we leverage that as kind of that trigger point to then say, okay, well, we need budget for these things. And by going back to that so many times, we were able to kind of develop the more modern plan that we have today, which is kind of a pre-LOI engagement where we understand, users, non-human identities, the kind of landscape of the systems and platforms that they leverage. If they align to our existing resources, it's cookie cutter. If it's something new, like a mainframe comes in that we've never touched or, have the capability to, that's definitely an area where we actually leverage a lot of third-party resources to help us identify and understand the potential risks and exposure, whether it be from like a DevOps perspective or just a pure infrastructure identity play.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Frank, I'm going to come to you with this one. And Locke got a little bit into the fun, messy operational challenges. Granted, sounds like they've done it enough times that they've kind of standardized on a nice, clean path. But I'm curious from you, we recently did a survey that found roughly 60% of CISOs lacked confidence in their joiner, mover, leaver process. Maybe that is not everything supports SCIM, so it's not necessarily super simple. I'm curious if you want to be as honest as you possibly can, or not. We'll never know. But if you ran an audit tomorrow on, let's say, terminated accounts, let's just look at leavers for a moment. How comfortable would you actually be with what you found?
So I actually probably should have looked that metric up, knowing you were going to ask this question. But so my security governance team runs monthly leaver reviews. This is kind of a growth out of, past audit findings and things that we were trying to make sure we have corrections. And this gets reported out to me every month during my team's monthly operations reviews. Part of what they're doing is just obviously making sure we're keeping it in check, but also looking to identify any root causes and see if we can work on corrective actions. And we've had numerous meetings with HR to try to correct their processes and amend them to address any of these issues we had. I think one of the things we've ultimately found is the automated processes are working great. I mean, they're terminating within hours as they're supposed to. Where we find a challenge with the levers is the human factor. Occasionally managers are very slow to enter terminations. And that's one of the areas we work with HR on to make sure that they have a standard process across the board where if somebody resigns from the organization, HR is reminding the manager of their obligation to do terminations. The other issue that we've had that I think caused us most of the issues the past few months is around joiners that didn't show for work. So technically they were accounts that were never in use and nobody really had access to them. But the way we were handling the terminations would come through in an audit and showing that basically it looked like we didn't do the termination within, it took a few days or even up to a week. So we're actually in the process right now of working with our HRIS team, and they're updating and adding a new termination date. So instead of, they can still go through their process and do a back date, we're going to get the actual date of the termination that will come through to our system and allow us to hopefully improve our audits. So I think that's been the biggest issue, is making sure that managers understand they have this obligation that they need to, put the termination in as soon as possible so that we can get them through. Currently, we look for 24 hours, but ultimately, when it comes to our system, it's less than 4 hours that they get automatically terminated.
Thanks, Frank. That's interesting. I hadn't heard a lot of scenarios where individuals would get hired and not come to work. I've heard a lot of using third parties or using AI or using contractors, et cetera, to do the interviewing process for you, but not necessarily from the actually getting hired and not showing up. So that's interesting. So one aspect you said there, Frank, was the human in the loop problem. Do you think that currently, as of today, the technology is probably there and good enough and that the human aspect and the human element probably the most challenging. Would that be something similar in your case within your organization?
Yeah, definitely. And again, we've proven out time and time again that the automated processes through our identity governance solution are working, as expected, and they're terminating quickly. It's a matter of just, ensuring that, the managers are getting this entered in a timely manner, and that it flows through downstream into our systems and handles the terminations. So yeah, I mean, we're finding it's more of the human factor, not the automated processes.
So the human factor is also an interesting one in the mover process. I've seen many times, even in my own career, maybe one user moving from one team to another, keeping some of their existing permissions, and the challenges that can come with that, especially from a privilege creep standpoint. So I'm curious, Locke, have you all seen that type of a challenge as well? And if so, how have you looked at addressing it?
Yeah, I mean, so I think that the joiners levers is well trod, right? Like the HRIS integrations are well developed for that. But those mover scenarios, right? You have to get into the nitty gritty of real business, and a lot of times either the HR teams or the IT teams or the business teams don't recognize the potential risk of that transition. So within our business, right, like we've got a lot of different teams under, let's just say, tax, right? Tax is a nice, easy, broad, hey, you're joining the tax team. But we've got 47 sub-departments under tax, right? You've got specialty tax, you've got audit, compliance, all the kind of like subcomponents. So when someone moves from one team to another, there needs to be a significant kind of decoupling of their client access, because the client may not traverse those different boundaries. So that's been really an area we've struggled in, and are really trying to figure out how we can automate it, because that's the only way. I think to Frank's point, like when you can automate it, you can understand it, and that's how you can actually implement it, because no one's going to sit there and move accounts manually anymore. Like maybe AI at some point will help us with that. But that's a big challenge that we're working through, and I feel the only way it's going to be able to be modified or achievable is with a much better alignment with the kind of the understanding your business processes. And another area I think that Frank mentioned was managers have a responsibility in the business line, so communicating to them their responsibility is a critical aspect of that.
That makes perfect sense. One saying that I heard a couple days ago that actually might pertain to all three of you, knowing that you each travel, far distances often, is people who change roles accumulate access like frequent flyer miles. So that kind of resonated a little bit with what you just said, especially, I would have only thought of tax as a one department, but it sounds like there's, at least in some organizations, 40 plus sub departments for tax. For me, it's just April 15th. This is the only tax I ever pay much attention to. David, so we talked a little bit about movers, levers, and joiners. I'm curious, from your point of view, do you try to treat contractors and vendors and managed third parties similar as to how you would treat an employee? Or do you try to treat them separate in this type of process?
That's a good question. I'm in crypto, so we don't trust anybody. So crypto is the true definition of zero trust. I don't, I can't trust employees. I can't trust, business partners. I can't trust contractors. I can't trust vendors, only because it's too easy for a mistake to happen. So I generally have to apply a zero trust construct to everyone, and still try to give them the minimum necessary access, again, as usual, to do their job. And I think too, even now as we do use AI and things like that, now I have to get into the granularity of like ABAC. So in case RBAC wasn't enough, looking at how do we successfully make sure we apply ABAC to our agentic tools and things like that, is to only give them access to actually what they need at the minimal level that they needed to do it. So I think that's a fairly consistent problem. And to echo Locke and Frank's earlier point, we have trading desks, we have different business units, and our people do move within those units. So, a lot of times the onus is on the receiving manager to make sure and validate that that user's access is appropriate. From the perspective of, you can't have enterprise tech or security look at it and be like, okay, do I know certainty that, this person needs access to those other systems? So to some extent, the human problem persists. I think we've gotten really good at the automation where, we group people using like the SSO and things like that, and we're 100% cloud and SaaS. So I kind of look at that as we cut them off there first, and then I can go in and get them out of the other specific applications.
That is an awesome response, by the way, of trust no one. Just, go validate that trust for everyone, regardless of their role within the organization. And you also mentioned, if I remember correctly, you had RBAC, you had ABAC. I'm pretty sure probably in the next few years, we're just going to have alphabet soup of some character in front of back. And we'll see how that goes, especially in the agentic world. And we'll talk about that in a few minutes.
As you get into NPCs and you get into the agentic agents and how do you tokenize them and things like that. So you can, because in that case is, we have to think about how do we pull their access even faster than you would pull a person's access, only because they can potentially cause harm even faster than a person.
Yes, they can. So Frank, back to you for a few moments. Especially if I remember correctly, you said you had gone through CMMC and some of the other federal mandates that have come up in the last few years. I'm curious, in some of the federal mandate wording, it calls for phishing-resistant MFA. But in some of the research that I've read and seen, et cetera, that term can mean wildly different things to different individuals. It can mean something from just a general push notification to a hardware token to a FIDO2, a security key to a pass key. Definition is all over the place. And I'm curious, from your point of view, where do you draw the line on what actually qualifies as phishing-resistant MFA?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, we're CMMC certified, but at the same time, a lot of the same regulations apply to our entire network, not just those environments. They just need to be segregated for specific regulatory purposes. We've got a pretty large user base, and some technical, some non-technical. So our approach has always been to try to keep MFA management as simple as possible. So we don't offer a lot of options. For the most part, our primary MFA is an authentication application app on the mobile devices. We've been using the numbers matching for authentication, and since that's been deployed, we've not had any successful attempts at compromised accounts due to MFA fatigue and things like that. We do have a number of staff who are working on customer sites. They're not allowed to bring mobile devices in, so for them, we also do issue hardware tokens just for that small group.
Perfect. Within that, maybe lock, within some of these compliance frameworks, they're starting to get more specific about what that phish-resistant side means. I'm curious, when you all within your organization are trying to dig through all of these frameworks, are you seeing that it's still ambiguous enough? Or is it still kind of being loosely interpreted, and then you're just doing your best that you can to try to follow that framework and adhere to it?
Yeah, I mean, I think organizations need to define what their standard is up front, right? That's where our policies and procedures and standards come into play. Unless there's a very specific hard guideline that you can follow and adhere to. So, at a minimum, it's document what you do and do what you say you do. The reality is things like SMS and TOTP are kind of going the way of the dodo. They're inefficient, but I mean, how many banks out there still use SMS, right? If our regulators are holding back our banks from potentially being able to adopt true password resistant or phishing resistant MFA, organizationally, we're also at the mercy of our third parties. So we have to kind of align to what the least minimum is, but also be flexible enough to move up the maturity scale and say, hey, if I can support full phishing resistant MFA on my IDP, with an Okta or an Entra or a Duo or any of the other kind of capabilities out there, use that as much as you can, but then have hard controls around where you can't use that. Like if you've got a line of business tool that only supports SMS, right? You have to audit that and have really good compensating controls to support the potential risk that exposes you to. So I think it's a broad swath of everything all at once. And being able to understand that and define that, kind of to David's point, like you've got to have your basics or you're going to get owned no matter what. So if you're not aligning or understanding what your multi-factor layers are and where you might have gaps, you're going to have a bad day.
Absolutely. And with that, David, you kind of are living almost on the edge of the future within your organization. And one of those futures is to try to see if we can get rid of passwords in general, right? The number one attack vector, according to Verizon DBIR, is still credential abuse. And I'm curious if you think that maybe by 2030 or sometimes in the 30s, if you think we can actually get to a world where we kill the password completely, and if so, what do you think is actually like generally different about this point in time than the last 10 years that we've tried to do this?
Yeah, I think from a capability point of view, it's possible. I think what would it be replaced with? That is generally going to be challenging, from the perspective of, when you look at the fact that I'm part of a global organization. So I can't necessarily just say that, hey, I'm going to use biometrics everywhere or things like that, because, that would be highly frowned upon in some of the geos that I'm part of. So I think coming to, the challenge there is, I think the technology is available and will only get better. I think it's more a matter of, what's the trade-off from a privacy perspective or from another perspective or a UBA perspective of doing these things, from what else is it going to reveal about my end users that may or may not be appropriate to reveal from that perspective. So I think it's something that's solutionable. I think the trade-off right now is just trying to figure out at what cost and at what cost is acceptable. I mean, in my mind, going through with the amount of traveling that I do is, I'd be happy to give you a DNA sample if it gets me through TSA faster, but not everybody is willing to do that. So, yeah, I think there's definitely trade-offs.
Just to jump in too, I think, we're talking about the high end, and everybody's got a, the concept that everybody has a mobile device, like that doesn't always overlap when you're working in other countries as well. There are significant gaps to having a modern mobile device in a lot of scenarios. And hey, Android 11, maybe it's been in end of life for a decade, but guess what? There's a bunch of Android 11 still out there. There's a bunch of iOS, early iOS out there. So being able to align to one standard is impossible these days, right? Like, so having flexibility and control and being able to identify the best possible scenario for the ecosystem that you're dealing with, I think is a critical aspect of what we're dealing with in identity.
Yeah, Chris, I kind of add as well in our industry. I mean, NIST is now, publishing that they accept this, but I think we are still unconvinced how, we have a diverse customer base, supporting again, at the federal and state levels. We still have a variety of regulations we need to comply with. So we're not sure how broadly and how quickly it's going to be accepted. I think one of the recent conversations we had around this, we decided we're going to start discussions with our various auditors. I mean, we have internal auditors, external auditors. We have several that support just some of our federal requirements that they have to do our certifications, to try to get their perspective and see if they're going to even accept it. Because one of the things I can't do is go make a broad change like that, then have an auditor come in and fail us for one of our required certifications.
Yeah, it's definitely going to take a coordinated effort if and when we get there, whether that is from an auditor standpoint, whether that is from a standard standpoint, right? Like Loxy, you mentioned, device standpoint. When you were talking about the differences in device versions, the first thing that came to my mind, just based on our previous conversations happening, was that OIDC's been around for 15 years, but yet SAML is still predominantly used. And so, we've got the standard side, we've got what devices are you using? Do you even have a Touch ID even on your Mac, or is your iOS in a version that can handle Face ID? And then back to David's statement, around the world has different rules, different regulations, different willingness. So whether David's willing to give up his his DNA or not, I think we should put that to the test. Just saying, maybe the three of us will see if he's actually willing to do that. But
depends. Is he gonna get me to the front of the TSA line every time? If so, we can talk.
We'll see what we can do.
It'd be clear
Um,
plus plus.
yeah, exactly. Hey, Clear's coming out with some new stuff now to try to get you to the front of the line a little bit faster. And now there's even TSA going through with a biometric TSA now as well to try to help you
Oh,
get
there's
their
touchless ID.
Yep, yeah, I have that. Yeah, I'm willing to be progressive in this space.
Hey, to get on an airplane faster, it's worth it sometimes. But okay, so I'm curious. Maybe let's go back to David, since you started all of this with the initial chat of phishing resistant maybe can't be placed everywhere. Some, the banking apps, for example, still using SMS, etc. I'm curious. We did a survey a while ago, and it found that roughly 90% of CISOs said that they try to prioritize sometimes security over user experience. But our research has shown that poor user experience drives workarounds that can create more risk. Right. So I'm curious, from your point of view, like, how do you deal with that and think about that paradox? And is security first actually the right framing of all of this, or is there something better?
Yeah, good question. I think from the perspective of it very much depends upon what kind of industry that you're in. When I look at it from the perspective of I'm in crypto now, so we're definitely a security first kind of organization, only because, keys, credentials, any of that's results in an instant monetary loss. It's not that I have time to look at the SIM and I have a certain amount of time to respond to it. It's like I have 10 minutes to figure out what's going on before there's probably monetary loss associated with it. So I think in an industry like crypto, there's an expectation that if you want to keep your funds, you need to be security first. I do agree with you that user experience and balancing that is very important, and it's not easy to do. But I think, fortunately, if you're in the crypto organization, you just see bad things happening to people every week that don't know better. So it kind of lends itself to being a very security first type of environment. But I think, when it comes to other things that are equally important, when you look at your healthcare records, you look at other things, these are very sensitive pieces of information. I want that to be secure, but I also have the expectation when you look at the generations of people that have to access this stuff, it has to be accessible. From that perspective, whereas I would probably have a hard time explaining to my mom, how do you use a crypto wallet or things like that. You don't want that to be the experience of somebody that's just trying to look up their lab records or something like that online, but you want that to be protected. So I think it's a consistent challenge that we'll have to deal with. And you also look at it from the point of view as a former regulator. We talked about whether it's financial institutions that are still using SMS or things like that. There's a certain degree of proportionality. As a regulator for the 8 largest banks in the world, so they're held to a different standard than definitely held to a different standard than the local credit unions or a mid-sized bank. There's something that we have to apply from a regulatory perspective, that's proportionality. I can't expect, a financial institution that maybe has revenues of, $10 to $100 million to compare itself to the 8 largest banks in the world that have market caps in the hundreds of billions of dollars. So the security that they're applying for their customers and their end users has to be proportional. In other words, they can't avoid MFA or SSO, but they may not go to the level of issuing like a YubiKey tokenized device or other things like that. So even from a regulatory aspect of it, there's a certain degree of proportionality that has to be applied to the size of the institution that's being regulated.
I'd add, like David, and we're also heavily regulated, and one of the things that I've always tried to instill in my team since I took this job 7.5 years ago is like they need to see ourselves as business enablers. So yeah, we always have to come in security first, but as we're looking to deploy new solutions or make changes in the environment, we're always trying to consider like how do we remove as much friction as possible. We're not going to be able to remove it all the time, but I agree, and I'm sure David and Locke have this experience as well that anytime there's too much friction, it is driving users to go outside of our policies and try to do workarounds. So, we really always try to look at the user experience and the potential business impact. I'm proof positive. I'm sitting here working off my personal laptop, and a change that I just pushed out to make it a little bit more difficult for data loss on personal computers or non-managed computers. I'm kind of struggling with it a little bit this week and saying, okay, but I know we have to do it, and so we can't always remove all the friction, but I think that we try to come into that with that approach, that if we're looking at new solutions or we're looking at making big changes with the environment, how do we at least make it as frictionless as possible, or if not, then we can at least try our best to explain why we're making those changes.
And that's a great point, because trading perspective, if I introduce anything to trading that increases latency, it's going to make for a very long day for me anyway.
Yeah, I think we'll all want to avoid adding latency there. We don't want any of that to happen. Frank, you hit on something very good there. You used the term enabler, making sure that you're an enabler for the team, that you're not necessarily always in the way. You try to make it easy. And I'm curious, Locke, speaking about enablers, one of the highest enablers, or one of the highest potential enablers currently right now is everything around agentic AI, and how can we help people in being able to use it or not, and what type of gains can we grab from it. I'm curious, though, from an agentic AI standpoint, and the fact of the potential risks involved in it, I'm curious, are we being appropriately alarmed for those potential risks? Or are we overhyping the amount of risks that could come from it?
I think it's proportional to the maturity of your organization and how you've handled identity to this point. So realistically, agents are accounts, they're doing things. Most of the time, those accounts are associated with another individual entity. So if your CFO is running something in ChatGPT or Claude, that's auspiciously going to be running as them, right? So you have that ability to see that. It's these autonomous capabilities that are obviously a little bit more interesting. And I think the reality is it's still a data problem. It's still an identity problem. So if you have data problems and identity problems, you're just going to have those problems a lot faster and a lot more frequently, and you are going to have a bad day, right? Like at the end of it. So for us, it's maintaining kind of best practices, having your audit controls, having your identities clearly defined, what they're doing, what their scopes are, and delivering those results, just pays dividends in the long run with the agentic shift that we've been seeing.
Are you finding kind of the governance side of this? Do you think it's similar enough to humans that most of the systems we've designed around governance will work? Or do you think that as this space evolves, our governance systems need to evolve with it?
Yeah, I definitely feel that we're going to have to transition to more, at a minimum, faster governance, right? But potentially automated governance in a lot of these scenarios where, the only way we're going to be able to track some of these capabilities are with automation, or potentially another agent watching the agents. How deep is the agent rabbit hole going to go? But operationally, it is, back to the friction conversation. You can't take 2, 3, 4 weeks to do an audit of some of these things. Especially, it's back to the vulnerability problem, right? Like, we have hundreds of thousands of vulnerabilities that hit every day. You're never going to be able to triage and track and support and maintain the vulnerability. So we're seeing that same kind of logarithmic increase in more exponential, sorry, not logarithmic, increase in these agentic capabilities. So compliance isn't going to keep up. So we're going to have to change compliance in that situation.
And I think, Locke has a very important point, because I think in general, I know it's coming to the forefront now as we talk about, agentic AI and things like that. But the whole human in the loop thing is never scalable. It just isn't. From the point of view of, how many records can you expect one person to manually review out of an automated system? And especially with, the agentic AI, where we're talking about, bounding these things, and then there's a escalation of what needs to get to the human in the loop. Great. If you have maybe one agentic AI agent, that might be possible. But just, in general, it's been my experience that it doesn't matter whether it's identity access management or with agentic AI for overriding certain types of decisions, human in the loop is just not scalable.
Agreed, David. I don't think human in the loop consistently being there all the time, it's eventually not going to scale, especially when Locke gets to his agents, managing his agents for the discovery of his agents and the governance of his agents, and Locke just manages agents moving forward. But I'm curious, with all the agentic AI buzz, with all the work going on throughout it, it's kind of highlighted another, I'm not going to call it a sore area of identity, but maybe not always a front in line and center area of identity. And that's just general non-human identity governance, whether that's just a service account that's sitting there. So I'm curious, maybe Frank, from your side, have you seen this work within agentic AI also bring into the front fold just general non-human identity management and governance? And if so, has there been any changes in your organization as a result of it?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think earlier on, David made a comment about hygiene, and I think hygiene of our enterprise directory is something that is, companies have struggled with for a long time. And, we've really tried to enforce a lot more standardized management. Some of this was just driven by early pen testing results, and having service accounts compromised by the penetration testers. So it's definitely been a focus for us. I mean, I think that the agentic AI and the growth of this will certainly increase the number of non-human identities. But so I think, what we're looking at is a continuing to enforce better hygiene within our enterprise directory, and also more discipline within our developers and our users that are, managing these agents. I mean, you're going to have issues where, you don't want to have an issue where, like, we have a developer who doesn't want to request a new identity, and now you have multiple agents running off the same identity, and we can't keep track of those. I mean, we've been seeing the same problem for years, right? I mean, you go, decommission an application, you delete the service account, next thing another application dies because it was using that same service account. So I think we still have the same issue, but within our organization, we've been focusing on this for the past several years. Again, kind of coming out of some of our penetration test results and making sure that we're locking down those identities. We're taking more of a standardized management approach to how they're created, how they're locked down and restricted within the system, within the directory, and then and again how we do the ongoing lifecycle management of those identities.
That makes perfect sense. And Locke, we had talked earlier about your M&A activity, and how at times that has, at least early on before the process was built to where it is today, where you use it as a chance to have additional funding to improve your overall operations. I'm curious, though, are you all looking at using the move for agentic AI and non-human identities in a similar vein, where you're able to capitalize on this market change as a way for, especially because in many cases it's gone to the board level of, we need to use AI, we need to push AI more and more, get more efficiencies out of it. Are you able to use that as a lever to gain increased funding for changes that you all need within your organization to adapt to it?
Yeah, I mean, it's been a significant transformation for us. The reality is, in the tax, audit, accounting, CPA space, not as many CPAs are coming out of college anymore. So no matter what, we have a decrease in our workforce while we have an increase in our need to deliver. So leveraging AI is going to be a key stakeholder kind of position for Aprio. We actually just positioned a $300 million AI investment, whether that's internal enhancements, or we've actually looked at acquiring and have actually acquired one AI company that was developing AI tools around tax and CPA advisory services. So realistically, Aprio is transforming into a much more focused, technology-driven CPA firm of the future. I mean, in a perfect world, right? It's a nice, clean scenario. It doesn't always work, but that was one of the early. So having been at other companies that did large M&As, that's where a lot of bad things and bad behaviors and bad unknown activities come into your organization, and that's definitely a concern that I had with our M&A strategy. Our leadership respected that, and we were able to have that as kind of our guiding principle.
So, David, Frank and Locke have both mentioned how they've been able to or they've seen some need for changes within their organizations as a result of agentic AI and being able to utilize that movement as a way to add funds to make changes to the organization for that adoption. I'm curious, maybe from the crypto side, or maybe even from just your previous roles and speaking with some of your older colleagues or individuals that you know, are you seeing either your own organization or other organizations take that same approach where they're able to use this change in the entire industry as a way to make changes within your organization that maybe you wish you had done in the last 10, 15 years, but just didn't have, or changes that you wish you had done in the last 5 or so years that maybe you just didn't have the funds to be able to do it?
So we definitely are making changes from that perspective with, the it's not necessarily onslaught, it's probably the wrong word, but the fact that, agentic AI and it's becoming ubiquitous almost at this point in time. So we definitely have a need to be able to manage it. And then even to that identity point too, I want to be able to manage it at a level of, what are my developers doing with the tool versus what are my different business units doing with the tool, and they should not all be able to have, I'd say carte blanche to do everything from that perspective. So, these are very, very powerful tools that we're introducing into the organizations, and they can lead to enhanced productivity, or, they can lead to some or fairly disastrous consequences. So I need to look at it from the point of view of, whether it's something like Cursor, or whether it's like Claude, of not only, from an agent point of view, how does it act within my organization, but I want to be able to say that, developers are able to use this within this construct. Trading is able to use it within this construct, front office, back office. I want to be able to have even more granularity and I guess guardrails, essentially, that I can apply to these things.
Absolutely. And each team, each organization, slightly different. Say those guardrails, even within your own organization across those different teams, they need to have their own guardrails for different capabilities, et cetera, based on what they're able to do. So that makes perfect sense.
Yeah, and not only from a usage point of view, but I'm just even thinking from the fact that we're fairly highly regulated. So I don't want my own users creating a regulatory incident for me.
Yeah, no, that's the last thing you want. I'm curious though. Let's take it completely opposite, 180 degrees difference, and that is on a high note. So, David, I'm going to start with you. We've previously have asked this question to a handful of CISOs. Each one has come back with a different response, and that is, what is their identity security wish list? Some of these answers have been around things like lifecycle management, help with non-human identities, better seamless movement between IDPs, maybe even in lock standpoint of acquisitions. So I'm curious, if you could wave a magic wand, or a pen in this instance, if you could wave this magic pen and fix one identity problem overnight, what would it be and why?
So being we're 100% cloud and SaaS type of organization, I would say, seamless, truly seamless integration across all of these platforms.
David, I said overnight, not
Well,
in
you said it's a magic wand, so I'm expecting it to be a high-speed magic wand.
I like it. Yeah, magic wand. We'll call it a pen for now, but yeah. Oh, that would be incredible, especially from Duo being a lot of, in most cases, cloud. We have a bunch of on-prem customers, but yeah, that would be incredible. Frank, same question to you. I'm gonna ask all three the same question. So Locke, you actually have an advantage here. You can think about it for a moment. Frank, got this magic wand. Might be looking like a pin, but it's a wand. One identity problem you can fix overnight. What would it be and why?
So I think in my case, it would be role-based access control, particularly with our joiners, movers, and leavers processes. When you look at, the amount of data we have, the number of applications, being able to have a really good and solid RBAC would help facilitate management of access, management of application control. I think, people, when they talk about RBAC, they really often underestimate the number of roles that they truly have within an organization. And I would say, like in our case, we have a company, about 50,000 employees. We support several hundred projects for our customers, and so those roles are spread out. So when we start looking at it, I mean, we have in the area of tens of thousands of roles. So internally we have this conversation of, oh, let's do RBAC. It's like I think they just think of it as like one project is one role, and this project's another role, and security is a role, but it's not. Even with my own team, we have several dozen roles. So I think the magic wand would be, if we can make that work, it would certainly eliminate a lot of the manual work we have and a lot of concerns we have about, especially movers going from one role to another, and increasing the amount of access they have that maybe have mistakenly not been removed before they made the change.
With the magic wand, would you stick with RBAC, or would you choose one of the other alphabet letters in front of the back standpoint?
Well, I think at the moment we're kind of looking at RBAC with our role, but I think we're still kind of early in the process and trying to determine what the right answer would be for us. So I don't know that I got a good answer for that question for you right now.
So, Locke, you're last, which means you had the most amount of time to prepare for this, all, 2.5 minutes. So, magic wand, one identity problem, what would you fix and why?
So I'm looking at this as a genie magic 3 wishes. So I'm definitely taking David and Frank's as my first two. For me, it would be that every system had phishing-resistant MFA, period.
Did you say it that way because you know who I work for and you're coming after my own heart? Or
No,
because you
no,
truly believe it?
it's I've worked with other systems and we don't have that everywhere all at once. And it's probably the most impactful way for organizations to protect their identities, and that lets you focus on other things like data and all the other fun issues that we get to work through.
Okay, I'll buy that. Just to spill the beans, I think on mine it would probably be interoperability across all the security vendors, across all of the SaaS and on-prem products, that they actually truly interoperate, that organizations or products don't take this standard and then add their own flavor on top of it, but they just stick to the actual standard and we can all interoperate together. Because if each security product can work together, even encompassing identity within it, I think it could help make your all's lives a little bit easier. Though, Locke, I'll go back to yours as well. I'll take my magic genie wishes as well and say I get 3 + 1, so I'll take all 4.
You wished for more wishes.
I did. Well, thank you, David, Frank, Locke. Thank you for your time today. Thank you for your insights. And I truly hope that this magic wand, or Locke turned it into a genie with 3 wishes, that they all actually do come true overnight for you. So thank you again for joining.